Tobias, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Glad to be here, Joseph. This is an exciting time for voice.
It's more than just exciting. I mean, it's unbelievable to see what's going on in the space. And what I'd really like to do at some point is get to the topic around how voice is impacting the connection to all digital devices, not just voice itself, but how it interacts and something that we interact with going forward. But before we go down that path, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what your path was going forward to get into this space and becoming president of WillowTree.
Yeah, so I grew up in terms of my digital experience at AOL in the late 90s. And, those of us in our 50s remember AOL as being the center of the internet for a while, similar
Absolutely.
to Google and a few others today. So that was just an exciting time and got to know a lot of the players that are still around. But what I learned there and why how AOL separated itself from its competitors at the time is this relentless focus on user experience, especially for consumers and making at the time the internet accessible for the average consumer, right? That was a big leap at the time. And that focus on what matters to users has kind of stayed with me ever since. So I was there for almost a decade. Then I started a company called leads.com, which was an early company helping small businesses get on the internet. Another thing that might be hard for the younger listeners to imagine is 25 years ago, the third biggest media space in the United States was the print yellow pages. There was more money spent on print yellow pages than on all radio advertising, on all magazine advertising. And basically, if you were a small business, you had to be on the print yellow pages. And then almost overnight, took 2 or 3 years, Google and other search engines replaced the print yellow pages. And so we helped small companies. They had to build websites to get online, and then they had to market themselves on Google, Yahoo, et cetera. So that was our business. That was acquired by a company called web.com in 2008. 2005, and I stayed till 2008. And then as I was leaving, Steve Jobs opened up the iPhone. And we kind of recognized right away that was a really, really big deal. Again, because mobile had been around for 15 years, and we had Blackberries and we had WAP and all this stuff that was okay, but not great. And then Steve Jobs and Apple recognized that a new user experience was necessary. The iPhone was launched, and that was a game changer. So we started WillowTree, which was originally focused on helping build mobile apps, then over time has done much more as a more complete agency. But that was really the seminal point, is seeing that wave was about to happen. And I think what's exciting right now is it's been, 14, 15 years since that happened. We are right now sitting in front of another wave that is, I think, just as big or even bigger than the mobile wave, which was the last one.
You are the first person that I've heard say WAP, wireless application protocol, since I don't even like literally since so I started a company called WAPUCOM way back in the day to help build basically mobile apps before even BlackBerry existed. So I was trying to build those types of things out, and it went so far, and then I just built web and wireless development companies type stuff, but really web focused at that point in time, front end. But fascinating. And yes, I was a little kid. AOL was huge. I mean, I can't tell you how many those CDs I got in the mail. And then you've got mail. It will definitely ring in my ears for the rest of my life. So I definitely know and understand the background. That's fantastic. It's great to hear about that. So things have changed dramatically. I mean, it has taken a while for, there has been voice and interactivity within that for a long period of time, but it's progressed rapidly over the last, I'd say, several years, and even more so in the last few months. And it's only going to exponentially get more dramatic, probably going forward. But I'd love to hear a little bit about your vision on trust, how we can trust voice these days. There's a lot going on and there's a lot involved in that, but does that make sense? Is that something that we as humans can trust,
Yeah,
voice these
so
days?
it's a really interesting topic, and as voice progresses, right? And I think you have to break down why do we want voice interfaces with our devices? Ultimately, it's because we can type three times as I mean, we can speak three times as fast as we can type, right? So it's tripling the rate at which we can communicate with the machine. However, the problem is we can read much more quickly than we can listen. And so I think when new technologies hit the market, they always try to copy the old technology, right? And the old interface for us has been keyboard in, screen, it's multimodal in this in a certain sense. But we tried as an industry to make conversations the same way humans have them and the same way we're used to interfacing with machines today. And when television started, it originally started was just recordings of radio programs or recordings of plays, right? It took a while to evolve that medium. And so that's what's happening right now. But the mistake that was made was thinking of voice as a voice-to-voice interface and then trying to make it more and more human, right? And there's this concept developed in Japan in the 1970s called the uncanny valley that states that the more human-like a non-human experience is, but it's clear that it's not human, the less people trust it. Because I think, the theory is they think of it as a zombie or a corpse. There's something, our alarm bells go off in our bodies that say, this is trying to be human, but it's not human. And so I think we've done a big disservice by trying to make things like Siri and Alexa seem like humans, but we know they're not human. It actually makes us trust it less than if we knew intuitively, kind of very deeply, that it was a device and not acting as a human. So that's one trust component. The second is, trust is two things: effective trust, which is the trust that we humans judge each other on in the first 5 seconds of seeing something or someone. It has terrible downsides. It's all bias is built into that as well. But then there's cognitive trust, which is developed over time, which is ultimately just does this person or this thing do what it says it's going to do? And voice has kind of fallen down in both regards. The uncanny valley is on the effective trust side, and then voice just doesn't perform historically everything that it's supposed to do. And so we've stopped using it, right? So what does that mean? Historically, Alexa and Siri couldn't hold more than 3 turns of a conversation, right? Like you ask it something, boom, 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 but each time you're starting over. Now it's changed in the last week
Yes, it has.
with ChatGPT opening up, because that's what ChatGPT is really good at. And so this marriage of what ChatGPT does and what Siri and Alexa do is going to unleash the next phase of this. And hopefully we're going to get away from designing human-like experiences to designing multimodal experiences, right? Where instead of an assistant acting like a human, they just do what we ask them to do. So, right, if you want to see a movie tonight, you don't want to ask Siri and say, hey, what movies are playing, and have Siri list 6 movies with 3 showtimes each, right? That's movie phone. We had that in the 90s too. But
Yes.
But what you want is you want to talk to your Regal Cinemas app and say, hey, what movies are playing tonight? See it on a screen because you can process that really quickly. And then say, all right, get me 2 tickets for Star Wars at 8 p.m. And then you're already pre-authenticated. Now you've taken a process that takes 2 or 3 minutes today on an app, and you've turned it into a 10-second process. And that's the kind of user experience shift that we know wins in a giant way. And so that's what we're on the cusp of, is this multimodal voice.
So, I mean, I love the way you explain that. I guess I'm trying to digest it in some ways because I was at the Museum of the Future in Dubai not long ago, and I interacted with a full-figured robot that had the humanoid face, and I could ask any question I want. There was no one around. It was like whatever. There was no one around, so I was just hanging out with this robot, and it was just extraordinarily trippy and a little bizarre. But what you've described is fascinating to me because it's like one of those things that I'm trying to process in the sense that, is it because it's so new to us that we're trying to just wrap our arms and our heads around just, all right, this is probably going to be the future. We're going to have things that are, yes, I'm interacting with my TV and it's going to just display what I want it to, so I'll be able to read it quickly. But there's also devices that are going to be either humanoid looking like, or they're going to be devices like Amazon Alexa or Google whatever home that don't look like humans as of yet, or just screens, and they will interact in a more dynamic fashion. And so it's just like us trying to just grasp at those types of things initially, or do you think long term it's going to be more like what you described in a latter part?
Well, I think whenever a new technology happens, and mobile's a good analog, right? It took 10 years of experimentation between WAP, BlackBerry, and then finally the iPhone that we figured out what's the right interface for a mobile device that's always on, always with us. Kind of how do we take full advantage of that? And so there's going to be all kinds of fits and starts as we experiment. But our gut is that this humanoid experience is a toy. It might have some gaming experiences, there might be some, but it doesn't solve a human need, right? And I think when you look at new technologies, that's where we always miss the boat, is we see something that we think is undeniably mind-bending and interesting, but if it doesn't solve a need, it doesn't have. If you went to CES in 2013, you would have heard that by 2018, half of American homes will have 3D televisions,
You don't
right?
have one?
It's amazing. Um, and then, 4 or 5 years later, there was Google Glass and the first AR wave, which has not manifested itself. And, Oculus, sure, there's some gaming applications and some very specific industrial applications, and maybe Apple will now solve that with their new device. If 5 years ago, all the reports were that by 2023, something like a third of American cars would be autonomous driving vehicles, right? And that hasn't happened either. It's not because of the technology. It's because the technology hasn't been worked in a way that it really solves a human need, or in the case of autonomous vehicles, there's still too much fear, regulatory, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we're going to go through lots of fits and starts, but our core thesis is what makes voice amazing is how fast it processes, how fast it receives information from humans to machines. But it's really bad at communicating from machines to humans. And so let's use it for what it's good for. Like, let's use it as the input function versus the output function. And what's interesting is everything's backwards right now, because we call these things that are in our houses smart speakers, but they really should be smart mics because we want to talk to them. We don't want to listen to this. So the whole thing kind of started out a little bit backwards from what I think the true value of voice is going to be.
No, that's a great way of looking at it. I hadn't thought about it, but it's totally true. So, in just a second, I would love to get into your book, The Sound of the Future, The Coming Age of Voice Technology. But before we do that, I'd love to tap into two different things, two different ideas. One is totally tossing this out randomly. Have you seen a device that came out probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago at this point in time? It was by a PhD student at MIT. And essentially, it really looks goofy. I mean, there's a picture of it, and I could send it to you. If you haven't seen it, or you certainly look it up. It wraps around the ear and then goes towards the chin, and it has four sensors on it. And what it does is it allows for him to think a thought, and then those thoughts are transmitted to whatever device it is. So he's using almost a mind reading technology where it's not being verbalized, but it's looking at what you're about to say without saying it. And it's then being transferred to an IoT device. Have you seen this type of thing
I
yet?
have not. That sounds amazing, right? Because that is even the next leap. I have seen a device that Facebook was testing 4 or 5 years ago, but it required a probe to be put inside your head,
Yeah.
and it was reading your thoughts, same kind of concept. But obviously putting a probe in your head is a whole different level of commitment.
Right. Slightly.
Yeah.
Yes. No question.
But I mean, that's the ultimate interface, right? Is that if it's reading your thoughts, you don't even have to verbalize them. You're taking that whole step out. But I have not seen that. That sounds super interesting, especially if it is effective.
It is, yeah, it's fascinating. So it's something, it's still in development. He built the prototype a number of years ago, so I need to check in on it. But okay, so separate from that, just before we get into the book, which I'd love to hear more about, are your thoughts on where voice is? And this is something that's sort of near and dear to my heart because I messed around with it for several years, and that is going back to the trust idea a bit, but with the advent of now far easier replicatable voice technologies, voice that it took me I think, an hour of dictating and reading something paragraph after paragraph a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, where it was then able to, okay, it sampled my voice a number of times, it knows my cadence, knows all that stuff, and now it's able to reproduce something that I type into something, and now it reproduces my voice, right? So it sounds like me very close. Back then, it was 90-ish% of what I thought it sounded like, and I did a presentation to the extent that I wrote something in that my boss, and I actually sampled his voice, was able to do this, say, Joe, you deserve whatever X dollars after this sort of thing. So it sounded just like him saying this because I did something. Um, so we're at a point where I think deep fakes are definitely an issue. And that's going to creep into politics and professional careers, impacting customer service and all this stuff. Where do you see this going? Is this a real area for people to be concerned about? I mean, clearly we're going to have to embrace it, but how do we differentiate? How do we understand the implications of this, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think I believe it's a huge issue, and I think it has a couple different levels, right? One level is just around copyrights and protecting your IP if you're an artist, and that's rampant right now, is basically stealing people's image and voice and replicating it. And then the more nefarious uses of trying to use voice to crack passwords or voice-based authentication, et cetera. On the second, it's always an arms race between security and people trying to crack security. And usually when there's a new technology, the bad actors, they get an advantage first, because it takes a while to harden these technologies. I think there are going to be continuously fingerprints that, for the foreseeable future, where you can technically detect these deep fakes. Humans won't be able to do it, but the machines will be able to detect that a machine created something versus another human. So I think on the authentication side, I feel more comfortable that that's a solvable problem. I think the IP side is a total Wild West issue and disaster, and is basically, as far as I can tell, it's not going to be solved by policy. It's going to have to be solved by technology. And I think it's very
Right.
analogous to Napster in the music space, right? If you remember, in the late 90s, early 2000s, basically for a while, all music was free.
I know well. Yes.
Illegally, but practically it was free. And then there was a while people thought, you know what, this is the end of the music industry. Now the music industry was able to recover because folks like Spotify brought it, made it legal, and now have arrangements to pay people for the consumption. So, but that took a decade, right, to really figure out. So I think this is going to take a decade to figure out this concept of deep fakes, et cetera. And I'm sure there will be, very sad stories in politics and personal lives, et cetera, of these deep fakes that don't get figured out very quickly, because to a human, they look so real.
No, it is zany, and I'm not going to even name the company that I work with, but there's a financial company that I've had my assets there since I was a little kid. All the lawnmower money would go to that company, and to this day, they still say, during the initial call, they use your voice to recognize you, to authenticate you. And I keep wondering how much longer they're going to allow that to happen. And I need to test this. I literally should replicate my voice, see if it works as an authenticator. And that would be like, all right, you guys need to change this. I mean, you're a huge institution, global institution, and you can't do that, in my personal opinion. But
Yeah. Well,
um,
we actually talk about that in a chapter in the book, and it should be one piece of authentication, but hopefully they're also ensuring that you're calling from the same phone
my
number.
phone number, yeah.
Here again can be spoofed, but you start adding layers and layers and layers, and it gets really much harder to do. And then of course they're looking for all kinds of patterns of what you're actually doing. But yeah, it's an arms race that's kind of never ending.
All right. Last thing before we jump into your book. Have you heard many people in the industry starting to talk about or leveraging ZKP, so zero knowledge proofs, in this space to authenticate, not to authenticate, but to prove that something is legitimate, something is real. So this goes back to cryptography. For better for worse, the crypto world is aflutter with this sort of thing. So authenticating, you can do images, you can do voice, you can do video, and some think that that could be the proof point going forward that will help solve for this thing. I was just tossing it out as a concept or an idea, see if you've heard about it.
I have. I think, I mean, there are lots of approaches to trying to figure this out, but I think the way this concept manifests itself in some sense right now is, and we're actually doing this with clients, is using one LLM to authenticate the other LLM's outputs, right? And so I think the where people are ending up is getting rid of hallucinations at their source is proving to be very, very difficult. Some folks would argue impossible. But what you can do is you can have second and third LLMs be checking responses of the first LLM to authenticate them. And that actually works pretty well for, reasons that I can't, well, they're just different models, right? You're using different models. And so if, and some of these issues right now, if you're everyone says, hey, the first industry that's going to get disrupted by the new LLM, by ChatGPT 4.0, et cetera, is going to be customer service, right? It seems so logical. But right now, we all have tons of examples of where ChatGPT gives you incorrect information with great authority and confidence.
Yes.
And you can't afford to do that if you're American Express, right? There's just no way. And you can't afford to have someone trick the model into falling in love with you, right? It's a zero tolerance game. So I think that people are going to fix that in the short term via these secondary and third level LMs, and then having humans in the loop for a long time, where instead of the first test, right, is going to be, you're going to keep all your customer service agents, but they're going to be getting their information from the LLM. And then once it gets so good that the customer service agents feel like 99.99% of the time they're just passing on the information, then we set it out in the wild to the end user. But that's going to take years, right? It's not going to be, we're not going to wake up December 1st of this year and have no more humans doing customer service.
I mean, I could talk to you for hours about this stuff. I'm like years. I'm wondering if it is literally years, like 2 years, because what you're just talking about is like augmented intelligence. So eventually, that is going to be passed off, and once everyone's comfortable with it, as you described, it just makes logical sense. I don't know. We'll see how much longer it takes, but you're dead on. I totally understand that. All right. Last thing I'd love to chat about with you is the book. Tell us a little bit more about the book.
So, couple things. One is, I have an incredible amount of respect. I always have, but now really I do, for someone who publishes a book. It takes a long time and it's a lot of work. And especially if it's not self-published, you're working through a publisher. I've just been so amazed and impressed by the process and the fact checking that goes into it, et cetera, et cetera. And it's made me change. When I look at books now, I'm really much more conscious if something is self-published or not, because I know if it's gone through a real publisher, it's a whole different level of due diligence that goes into it. So it's an amazing process. I'm so excited that it's coming out in October. It's funny, my book is about conversational AI, right? And why how voice-based interaction with devices is, in our minds, going to be the biggest shift in technology since mobile, and the one before that was the internet. So it's really kind of the third wave of interactivity. And it's funny, last November, ChatGPT 3.5 came out and became all the rage. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, crap, did we miss the story here? Was the real story generative AI, not conversational AI? But then over the last few months, it's become clear that the real story is the marriage of Gen AI and conversational AI. And the timing couldn't be more fortuitous, that a day before you and I are speaking, ChatGPT announces that ChatGPT can now speak and listen, and it's all happening, right? And we had predicted that in the book. When you write these books and you write future-facing things, you don't really know the timing of it. You're pretty confident it's going to happen. You don't know when. But it's amazing what's happened in the last year. And now I think people can really get their arms around, if you marry the capability of Siri and Alexa and ChatGPT, you're going to get to a whole new world of efficiency, interactivity, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really what the book is about. I think people intuitively get the concept. We, of course, go into the concept and the technology. But what we really talk about is examples of industries that are going to be impacted, jobs that are going to be impacted, and how important of a change this is, and why it's as important as mobile was or the internet was.
It is absolutely the most fascinating thing to think about in so many different ways. Um, I want to make sure that I have this right. It's the sound of the future, the coming age of voice technology, correct?
That's exactly right.
All right, excellent. My goodness. So what you're going to tell me now is that this entire 30-minute period, I've been interacting with a bot?
We're not quite there yet.
How many years before we get to that?
Maybe 5.
Okay.
Plus or
That's,
minus.
oh my God, that's scary. But I mean, it is no question coming. We all have to sort of wrap our arms around it. But thank you so much for your time today. I really
That's
appreciate it.
good. Thank you. Really appreciated the time.
Of course, my goodness.